Little man, my wide-eyed boy, for you the whole world's new. Every day is a trip on the Ferris wheel or a picnic at the zoo. I don't know much of aeroplanes or the old man on the moon, but I can sing of all those things I've seen, and I wrote this just for you. Be sure to eat your greens and know a thank you from a please. That laughter can cure a winter's cold and money never grows on trees. Each morning, go on and chase the dreams you dream of every night. And no matter what you do, you'll find your mother's always right. And like the gentle old folks say, count your blessings every day. Be kind to those that need it most, and that means everyone. Be sure to look before you leave, in case your shoelace is undone. I hope you find the kind of friends that make the days go by so fast. And when the time comes, find the perfect words to ask your first true love to dance. Like the winter folks all say, have a jolly holiday, whether it's Kwanzaa, Passover, Christmas, or just a good day at Punchestown. I was never all that good in school, but one thing I know is true. No matter how many big books I read, I'll never be as smart as you. I can hold you now, but not for long, 'cause the years go by so soon. No matter what you might grow up to be, just know I'll always be so proud of you. Song for Jacob. For Mila Wonka, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Keith. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for coming this morning. This is nice music and croissants in the morning before work. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit to you today about my work in filmmaking. I'm a graphic designer for filmmaking, so I make the graphic props and the graphic set pieces that the actors engage with it on the set, okay? So I do a little bit of film poster work and title design as well, but it's not really my day job. My day job is actually making the pieces that the actors handle. And in its most basic terms, that could be anything with like a graphic prop specifically, is anything with lettering on it, anything with a pattern on it, anything with some kind of photo or illustration on it, and pretty much anything that's made out of paper. So it could be like fake cinema tickets, fake postage stamps, fake Anne Frank's diary, fake shopfront signage, fake hanging signs, fake Dickensian goods receipts, fake map of Kansas, fake chocolate boxes, fake newspaper headlines, fake love letters, forged telegrams, and prison escape maps. So basically, anytime you see a character in a movie read a newspaper, somebody, somewhere, has to make that newspaper, right? We never actually just, use a newspaper that we find lying around, and I hope that's going to be, the reasons for that will be clear by the time I finish this talk. We're always thinking about the genre and the script and the plot and the storylines and the characters and everything else that's going on in the script. This is a scene from Grand Budapest Hotel. And I think Wes Anderson movies make a great case study for graphic design and film. Just because, it's not that Wes uses more graphics than other filmmakers do. Like, whatever you've watched on Netflix in the last week will have had, at least 2 full-time graphic designers on that show, I guarantee it, okay? So the volume of graphics is always huge. But I think the way Wes Anderson makes his movies, he really kind of he kind of casts graphic design as a character in his films, right? So he puts graphics at the foreground. He kind of aligns them in the center of the frame, so you can't miss them, you know. So it makes a great case study. Like every time I finished a movie and it was released, I'd go back home to my parents' house in Wales, and we'd watch it together, and I'd be pointing at the screen, going, "I made that, and I made that. Look, Mum," and my mum would say, "I can't see anything," you know, because you just really get this split second of screen time, and it's in the blurry background, or it's upside down, out of focus, or something. You know, the graphics aren't really supposed to be seen. Like if we're enjoying a movie, we're really caught up in the drama that's unfolding between the characters, right? We're not looking at the pieces of paper that dress a set. I know you're looking at these pieces of paper that dress this set now. That's because I'm talking about it. But it's also because it's a Wes film, so he's kind of placed them to be seen in the frame as well. This shot in particular I love because it has a real movie classic thing in it, and that's the kind of the detective's crime wall in the background. If you watch any kind of murder mystery at all, any show or film that has any kind of murder element to it, there's going to be a detective with a crime wall, and it's like a map of the local area. It's mugshots of the suspects, newspaper headlines about the crime that's been committed, and then red strings, right, pinning all these things together. Is this actually how the police solve crime in real life? I don't know, but this is how we do it in the movies. Yeah, so newspapers, fake newspapers. I make so many of these for movies, and sometimes it's easier than other times. Like sometimes you use a real newspaper, like the Irish Times, for example, and get permission from the Times and pay them a small fee, and then we can reproduce things and change things around. And sometimes you have to design newspapers for a fictitious country, like an entire national press for a fictitious country, and then it gets a little bit more complicated. So my first job ever, starting out after I graduated from film school here at UCD here in Dublin, was on the Tudors, which was a show, long-running show about Henry VIII. When I went for the interview on the job as the kind of art department trainee, I had worked for years and years beforehand as a graphic designer in an ad agency. And then I did a kind of a master's in filmmaking. But the designer who was interviewing me, my portfolio, and said, "Oh, you've got a graphic design background. We're actually looking for a full-time graphic designer on the show." And I found that really confusing because, you know, they were on the third season of the Tudors at this point, and I had seen a couple of episodes, and I had seen like amazing costume design and hair and makeup design and set design, but I hadn't been able to see any graphic design, right? Because I had come from an advertising background where I had been making like logos and websites and brochure layouts, and I didn't think that there were any of these things in the court of Henry VIII. Yeah. But as I did my training, which was just basically 1 week with the graphic designer who was leaving, she was getting out of there. I began to realize very quickly that just because there was no like graphic designers in the 15th century didn't mean that there wasn't any graphic design. It's just that in those days, the graphic pieces would have been designed by the craftspeople, okay? So, for example, if Henry VIII wants to chop his wife's head off, he's going to need a death warrant. And if he needs a death warrant, he's going to need a calligrapher, okay? And because back in the day, it was the calligrapher who was responsible for the design of all the royal scrolls and the style of the lettering. And today in filmmaking, it's the graphic designer's job in film to either imitate what a 15th century calligrapher would have created, or for us to hire a real calligrapher to come in and help us for the day, yeah. And then likewise, if you have any set that has like stained glass in it, like a church set, for example, at the time, it would have been the glazier who designed the stained glass, because it was the people who made the things who designed the things. And today in filmmaking, it's our job in the graphics department to try and imitate what a 15th century glazier would have created. And then you can jump back a few hundred years to Roman times, for example. If you have to make some kind of tombstone or headstone, at the time, it would have been the stonemason who designed the lettering style for the headstone, because it was the person who made it who designed it. And today in film, it's our job to imitate what they would have done. And then jump forwards a few hundred years after the invention of the printing press. Let's say you have a scene in Victorian London Zoo, and there's like some kind of monkey information board that you have to design. At the time, who would have designed a printed piece like this? It would have been the printer, because it's the person who made it who designs it. So today, you know, like graphic designers, we use so many craftspeople to make our final pieces for us, you know. But at the time, it was always the craftspeople who were the designers as well. And our job is to kind of always imitate what they would have done. Like, I'm using the word imitate a lot. It's a lot of forgery, you know. I remember when the woman who was leaving the Tudors, who I was replacing, she said to me, you know, it's not actually a very creative job. And I was really surprised by that, because, like, to me, it was like the most creative thing in the world. Like, we were making stuff with our hands all day, you know, like with the huge volume of props that had to be made for a film set. It felt very creative to me. But over the years, I began to understand what she meant, because it's not about being original. It's about copying. There's a lot of copying. I'll give you some examples of that in a minute. So I began to set this little rule for myself, and that rule was that as I went on to more and more different shows of different periods, my rule of thumb was that if something had been made by hand at the time, then I should make it by hand now. And if something had been made with a machine at the time, then I can cheat and use my machine now, my machine being my Mac. So for example, shopfront signage, let's say for Victorian London. At the time, it would have been painted by sign painters and designed by sign painters. So today, I draw that lettering by hand, and then I give those hand drawings to the sign painters, and they paint it up into the set for me. I find that if I start with a font, we're always battling against that digital font, trying to stop it looking fonty, okay? But then with, say, street posters, because they would have been made by probably a letterpress printer at the time, so it was a machine, then I can use fonts now because a font will replicate that kind of block printing effect. These are things that we made for Penny Dreadful. I don't know if anybody remembers Penny Dreadful being shot here in Dublin. We used locations all around the city, because Dublin quite often doubles for Victorian London, because we still have a lot of the buildings, and it's a bit easier to close roads off for shooting, I think, and the tax breaks. So this is a piece that we made for, what's the street name? Dame Lane? There's a pub on Dame Lane. Not the Mercantile. It's near there, though.
Stag's Head.
Not the Stag's Head. It's opposite the Stag's Head. It's kind of...
The other one.
Yeah, the other one. I want to say McSweeney's? That's not a pub, is it? Anyway, there's an existing pub there, and we turned it into a Victorian theatre for a week. So this is a big kind of cast iron piece that I designed. And you can see that it has to work in daytime and at nighttime as well, depending on the light situation that's going on. So the first thing I did was I drew the lettering by hand, okay? Because, like I said, you know, if you start doing hand lettering with digital fonts, then you're just going to be fighting against that kind of digital look the whole time. And if you start by hand, then you're just going to get a lot more anomalies, you're going to get a lovely organic feel to things, and no two letters are ever going to be quite the same. And then later on, I digitize it, okay? And then I bring it into Photoshop and Illustrator, and I tidy it up a bit, and I turn it into like a full technical working drawing that we can issue to the construction crew, who are the people who are actually going to make this piece for us, okay? Like the metal workers and the glaziers and the painters and whoever else. But it wasn't actually made out of glass in the end, but it was made out of plastic because, you know, we just always have to use materials that are kind of cheaper and safer and lighter. So it was made with Perspex, and then the pieces were brought into the paint shed, and the painters add the texture and the color to it as well. So I think they painted it with PVA glue, which goes on white, and then it dries clear, and it gives it that lovely kind of mottled stained glass look. And then you can see it in the shot as well. So like this is a great example of why we wouldn't use glass necessarily that high. Like I don't want to be the graphic designer that's responsible for like cutting an actor's head off. Yeah, so that's Dame Lane in Dublin. And then I also work in animation sometimes as well. And I really love working in animation. Like, if you ever have a chance to work on any kind of motion picture and it's animated, go for it, because it's a much more civilized area of filmmaking than live action. Like, everybody is just much nicer to each other, and there's more time, and nobody's under quite the same pressure, because, you know, stop motion, like, especially stop motion animation, you know, it's a painstaking process. Like, they have all these clay models, and they take a picture, and then they move everything like half an inch, and then they take another picture, and this goes on for months and months and months. So the pressure is off. So I love working in animation. And this was a movie called The Boxtrolls that I worked on, which was about all these trolls who live under the ground, and they wear cardboard boxes for clothes. And I remember when I was speaking to the production designer about the job, he said to me, you know, so it's set in a kind of European city in the kind of late 1800s. And I was like, oh, great. Which European city? Because it's an American production. And he was like, oh, you know, just Europe. I was like, oh my God, I'm in. I love it. This kind of mythical kind of late 1800s Europe. Like, it feels to me like we can have a bit of fun with this. You know, we don't have to be like totally historically accurate. Yeah. Like I might have been in some of the other pieces that I've worked on. Because I think up until that point, I had really just done a lot of like costume drama, historical drama. So you kind of had to get a lot of the facts right. So this felt like there might be a bit more freedom. But because I'd come from that background, I started the same way that I always did, and that was to start doing my research. The trolls, they all wear different boxes, and they're each named after the box that they're wearing. So there's like Matches, who's wearing a matchbox, and Shoe, who's wearing a shoe box, and there's Knickers, and his box keeps falling down. So it's a really fun premise, you know, it's a kids' film. So I started the way I always did, and that was to start doing my research. And because I was going to be drawing all the labels to the different Boxtrolls, I started looking for real packaging design from the 19th century. And I couldn't really find any food packaging. It kind of predates food packaging. You know, food at that time was sold in sacks and glass jars and whatever else. But I found all this lovely medicinal packaging, copper plate engravings from the 1800s. And they all seem to be kind of cure-alls. You know, we cure you of all desire for tobacco. I like this nerve builder, brain tonic and stimulants, which just seems to be made entirely out of celery. And sanitary tooth soap, which sounds disgusting, but I think it's just an early prototype for toothpaste, right? And my personal favorite, Dr. Warden's female pills for weak women. I'm in. So I took them to the production designer, and he liked them as a kind of a jumping off point. But one thing that he pointed out was that because they were copper plate engravings, there was a certain exactness to their design that he was actually trying to avoid in the movie. He said that there should be no straight lines anywhere in the movie whatsoever, okay? So no straight lines in any of the architecture, no straight lines in any of the character design, and no straight lines in any of the graphic design. I don't think we used a ruler in that art department for the 2 years that we worked on this movie. Everything was kept very organic and fluid feeling, and again, that's where the kind of hand-drawing stuff came in. And then the other thing you'll notice about them, if you're kind of eagle-eyed, is that everything is very slightly top-heavy. Okay, you can see they're just very slightly wider at the top than they are at the bottom. And that was another stipulation from the production designer. But why? You know, why would he want to do that? And it's because he's also using a reference, and he's using his own design history background, and he's basing the set design on this area of Yorkshire called the Shambles. And these were buildings that were built in, I think, the 13th century. And you can see they're very top-heavy. It almost feels like they're kind of falling in on each other, yeah? They were actually designed like that because this street was famously a street of butcher shops, and the butchers liked to hang their carcasses outside, and the buildings were designed to create shade in little alleyways. So you can see that, like, everybody has their own reason for designing the way that they design. And I think that kind of, you know, fundamental hand-drawn, organic, top-heavy feel is what gave the movie a lot of its kinetic energy, because don't forget that we're really, like, we're just working with lumps of clay at the end of the day, and the editor is going to do their magic and make it all flow together, but we really want to get that feeling of movement and life, breathe life into animated characters. One thing that I find I'm always trying to get my workshop students to think about, so it's a real hurdle for them to get over. Well, there's two main things, I think, two main hurdles to get over when you're making that transition from commercial graphic design into filmmaking graphic design. I think the first thing is just to start stepping away from your computer. I definitely find, like, I started teaching about 10 years ago, and I definitely think that a decade ago, people were doing less by hand. People were working very digitally all the time. Whereas in the last 10 years, I think there has been a shift, and people are starting handcrafting again more, which is great to see. But yeah, getting my students to step away from their computers and just start drawing by hand, that's one hurdle. And then the other hurdle, and this is more difficult for people, I think, is you know, trying to explain that it's okay to copy. I think a lot of the young, especially the young design graduates who come to my workshops, I think they feel that in order for their work to have value, it has to be original. And I don't think that's true. It's certainly not true in film design, okay? And I think film design really succeeds best when we do take from the world around us. I know that people feel a bit funny about, like, copying or imitation. I'm not asking people to, like, copy the ideas of their contemporaries on Instagram or Dribble or wherever. It's more about, you know, studying a map and letting that map inform your line style, or studying a building and letting that building inform your costume design, or whatever it is that you're doing. It's when we really look at the world around us and understand how to take from it and turn it into something new, that's when we're going to succeed. In this area of work, anyway. And also, like, is there anything less inspirational than a blank illustrator document? I would urge everybody not to start designing with this page open, you know? Like, start with something real. It's very, it's kind of scary, right? It's like life drawing. Like, probably lots of us here have done life drawing, at least during our design educations. Do you remember your life drawing tutor saying to you, stop looking at your hand, stop looking at your pencil and the piece of paper, and start looking at the life in front of you? That's why we're here, you know, that's why we've hired this naked model for the day. You know, and it's the same in film design, I think. We shouldn't just look at our paper and our keyboard and our pens and stuff. We need to always look at the world around us, and that's when it starts to work. So yeah, it's basically forgery. And some things are easier to forge than others, you know. I do think that when you work on a movie, even if you start with something real, you will develop it into something else, because you have to make it work for the script or the character or the plot or whatever it is that you're doing. But then some things have to be, like, more realistic. That's a passport from the 1950s that I made for a Spielberg movie, Bridge of Spies, which Tom Hanks was in. And the prop master got me a real passport from the 1950s, and I basically picked it all apart and scanned it all in and cleaned it up and stuck it all back together again and got it remade, basically. But everything has to go through a legal clearance process as well. You know, every single thing we make for a movie has to be sent to a legal clearance officer. And when I sent her the passport, she came back to me and said, okay, you can use this passport, but you have to stamp movie prop on every single page in big red rubber stamp. I mean, I said it to the prop master, and he came back to me with, over my dead body. Like, I don't think you can work on a Tom Hanks movie and give him a movie prop that says movie prop on it, you know? But, you know, in cases like this, I leave it to the people on the higher pay grades than me. If the prop master wants to take that on with legal, then that's up to him. Anne Frank's diary, this was something I made for an exhibition in Paris. And it's a facsimile of the real thing. And it was really interesting to work on. I mean, we had to do handwriting in another language and kind of tricky stuff for it. Don't worry. I love that little drawing of a dress that she did, which kind of folds out and it shows the full dress, and she's written about all the things that she likes about it, and she kind of has a complaint that her mother won't buy it for her. And it was a really lovely project to work on. But when it arrived in Paris, apparently the person unpacking the boxes thought it was the real thing, you know, and they got it out of the box in amazement that this had landed in their hands. And I think that's one of that was one of the highlights of my career, to feel like that I had really successfully imitated something like this. And then the other hurdle that I have to get my workshop students over is, you know, we're not always designing as designers, right? Because not all the characters in a movie script are going to be calligraphers or graphic designers. In fact, they don't make movies about graphic designers, right? So often we have to step into the shoes of the person whose prop it is that we're creating. So for example, if you have a baker character who's putting a name on a birthday cake, the cake itself will be the job of the food stylist on set, but because it's got lettering on it, they might come to the graphics department for a lettering style, okay? And if we're really good graphic designers for film, we're not going to, you know, what we're not going to do is just kind of choose some cakey looking fonts from a drop-down list of fonts in Illustrator, right? If we're really good graphic designers for film, what we'll do is we'll go down to the prop shed and we'll get the bag of icing sugar from the food stylist, and we'll see what it actually takes to write a name on a cake. Because we're always trying to let our tools dictate the style of the end result rather than the other way around, yeah? So for example, if you have a king, there's Henry VIII again, who's signing a royal document, we're not going to design the king's signature with a ballpoint pen. Again, if we're really good graphic designers for film, we'll go to the prop shed, we'll borrow the feather quill, and we'll see what it actually takes to write a name with a feather and a pot of ink, okay? Well, I think when I first started on the Tudors, I kind of, you know, I'd come from this digital background, and I was just like, really, we're going to use all those things? It's much quicker just to use a handwriting font. And I had to really rethink the way that I did everything. And now that I'm well-versed in it and well-practiced, it actually is quicker and more effective to use the real tools, okay? Like, I could spend 2 hours in Photoshop trying to make something look like a rubber stamp. Or I can just call up my local rubber stamp maker around the corner, and he can make one for me, and then I have it, and it's much easier to use, and also then the prop master has it to maybe use on set in case somebody needs to use it in the background. So here's another example of that. This is Zero's inscription for Agatha in the movie The Grand Budapest Hotel. He gives her a book of romantic poetry. And the piece on the left is the first inscription that we made in the art department, and we sent that to Wes Anderson. And, you know, he kind of liked it. He thought it was nice that it was all curvy and felt kind of romantic, you know, but he also said it looks like somebody in the art department has made it, right? So what we did is we did the piece on the left with the actor who plays the character Zero. There's Tony there. So we got him up into the art department. We taught him how to use the nib and the dipping ink, and we got him to copy the first piece that we'd done. No tracing, no rulers or anything. And he came back with something pretty much like this. I mean, we had to scan it in and clean it up a little bit, but it really kind of caught the essence of things, right? So you can see that the piece on the left feels like it was made in the art department, and the piece on the right feels like it was made by a teenage boy in love in a Wes Anderson movie, yeah? There's kind of a lot of variables there to get that balance right. And then I don't think we ever saw the book in the movie itself. Like, I think we saw it in wide shot, but we never got that close-up on the lettering. And that's so normal not to get a close-up on your graphic prop. But look what did happen to it. Him too, right? And it's because of his handwriting. Yeah. So yeah, they use the lettering as a subtitle on the screen there. So you never know where these things are going to end up. And sometimes a graphic like kind of makes its way onto the movie poster, you know, and that's kind of exciting as well. So yeah, The Grand Budapest Hotel. I mean, this is a film that I will always hold in my heart. It was the first movie, it's the first big feature film I ever worked on. I'd done animated stuff before, but it was the first big movie I'd worked on. And I had been doing a show here in Dublin called Titanic, Blood and Steel, which you probably don't remember. It went straight to Netflix, which back in 2010 or whenever it was not a good thing. Nobody had a Netflix subscription back then. But I was really excited about the show because it was, it was 1912. So there were all these things available for me to use that I hadn't been able to before because I'd done kind of more like ancient history before. So all of a sudden I was like working with printed material and there were telegrams and letterpress things. So I really like threw myself into this Titanic project. And then like it didn't really have an audience at all when it was released. And they were supposed to release it for the centenary, but it didn't happen. But I didn't care because I had made so much work for it that I had in my portfolio then. And then I got a call from Wes Anderson's producer looking for a European graphic designer. And she said, Wes is coming to Europe for the first time. He's going to be making a film in Germany set between the wars. We're just wondering if you have any examples of graphic prop making from the early 1900s in your portfolio. And I was able to say, oh yeah, I do actually. I've got all this work from the Titanic TV show that nobody watched. And of course, Wes Anderson didn't care that nobody had ever watched the Titanic TV show. All he cared about was that I knew how to make antique newspapers, So that was kind of like my lucky star, really, to get that work. Sometimes people ask me about the lettering style on the hotel itself. So the hotel was designed by Adam Stockhausen, who is Wes's production designer. And they based it, again, so you can see again, like even if you're working on a movie about a hotel that looks like a giant pink cake, we're still taking from something real because that hotel on the right is the real hotel in the Czech Republic that Adam and Wes based their designs on for the hotel, okay? And then they brought me in to do the graphics, and one of the graphics I did was the lettering on the roof. And sometimes people ask me about the funny spacing. You can see like there's too much space really between the D and the A in Budapest, and possibly the A and the N in Grand as well. Well, the lettering was drawn by hand. The hotel was only a scale model. It was only ever about 9 foot high. It was shot against that green screen, and then later on in post-production, it was superimposed onto that lovely alpine background that you see in the movie. So I drew the lettering by hand. Wes Anderson approved the lettering style, and then we sent that drawing to the model makers in Berlin who are making this, cutting it out of mild steel or whatever material they use. And of course, because the model makers are also designers, they corrected my dodgy kerning, right? Because I think that's just our instinct, isn't it? We're always trying to correct things. So you can see there's their nice kerning, there's my dodgy kerning. You can see the difference, right? But when it was sent... When the picture of that was then sent to Wes, he said, oh, no, put the spacing, the funny spacing back in like it was in the original drawing. But why? Like, why would he want a mistake like that in his movie? Well, because it's also from a reference, okay? Like, every single thing we do starts with a real something somewhere down the line. And this is the Shepherd's Hotel, which is it was a really grand hotel in Cairo in Egypt. It's since burnt to the ground, I think, in the mid-century. If you've seen The English Patient, it's where the posh people from The English Patient stay when they're in Cairo, okay? That's how grand it is. And the thing I love about this lettering style is, if somebody asks me to design fancy lettering for the fanciest hotel in the world, I don't think I would come up with something like this unless I could see it, yeah? Because to me, it looks like whoever designed that lettering was up on the roof with a hacksaw, cutting the letters out and designing it as they went along, right? And at some point in history, obviously, that E has fallen off the roof and somebody else has climbed up a ladder and stuck it back up again, yeah? So I think that's what we're always trying to do in filmmaking, is we're just trying to make sure that things don't look too clean and too new and too manufactured by computers in an art department 2 weeks ago, We're really trying to draw from this like wealth of material that we have in the world around us. I think graphic design is just actually a very small part of the movie-making process. It's a small part of the art department, and the art department in turn is a small part of the bigger filmmaking process. We're all cogs in a wheel, It's kind of like we're an army, and we're all soldiers, and we all have our one little thing to do. And somehow, if we all concentrate on these little tiny details, then they can add up to this much bigger picture.